Hey, good morning. I'm going to say, ask my AV people, is the webcast on? Nod the camera. It's my favorite part of the morning. Yes, he nods. Isn't that so cute? They nod the camera. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. In case you don't know, the Wilson Center was created in 1968 by Congress as a memorial to our 28th president. And in his spirit, we bring the scholarly and policy communities together. And a little bit of news, in case you hadn't heard, last December, Lee Hamilton, our president, he retired, and we have a new president as of next week, Jane Harman, who is a congresswoman from Southern California. So it's very exciting for us here to have. We've got a woman president, and she seems way cool. We've only met her briefly, but yeah, it's kind of the news on the Wilson Center front. But the China Environment Forum, we've been hopping into the bunny year rather busy. If you're not on our mailing list and would like to be, let me know, because we've been sending out some news about a new project we've been doing that's funded called Choke Point China. That's looking at how energy development is impacting the water sector in China. And it's going to be a bigger theme in our continuing cooperative competitors work that a lot of you have been coming to over the past year or so. It's funded by Energy Foundation, Rockefeller Brother Fund, Blue Moon Fund, VLS, and USAID. So it's a kind of a big gang coming together to help us create these 12 multimedia stories on that. And so that's a big theme coming up. Also, the China Environment Series Issue 12 call for papers. Also inviting people to write on water, energy, or water and energy issues. So any of you out there, encouraging applications for proposals. And if you see the publication, you see I have a hard time saying no to people. Nice and thick. So yeah, please submit them if you can. Now today's meeting is one of our other themes. We're a busy shop here. Last year we started doing a few more meetings looking at the ecological footprint of China's investments overseas. And actually even before that, about 4 years ago or so, I was approached by some friends at International Rivers Network who wanted me to put on a meeting here looking at dam building in the Sudan. And I thought, well, I've gotten a lot of questions on this, China going overseas. And I had the meeting, but I felt that really, when I was looking around for people to be on the panel, that really there wasn't a lot going on in terms of proactive engagement with China on this issue, or even people who'd studied it that much. And there was just a lot of complaining. But I think we've moved beyond the complaining stage. And we're very lucky today. You guys are lucky, okay? Because you get to hear from people from 3 different organizations who have been very proactive in working with Chinese stakeholders on the Chinese overseas investments. And we're also, and actually the catalyst specifically for this day was Li Lin, who I met a number of years ago when she was fresh out of PhD land. And she said, well, I'll be in town briefly, like today. And she just came from South Africa and shoots off to Chicago tomorrow. So we were lucky to nab her. And so, and as the fate would have it, I was able to bring in 3 other way cool people who were going to talk about their work. Now, Li Lin is, she's going to be talking about her work on WWF's Global Shift Initiative that's been looking not just Chinese investment overseas, but also domestic, wisely seeing that these two are linked. Now, she is the deputy representative at the WWF China Program Office and broadly does a lot of work on the China programming and strategic planning. And so, and has got an interesting background of policy, business, and engineering. So she's like the ideal person to be working in this sphere. So I'm really happy you could come, Li Lin. So, and then next, we've got some of our buddies from World Resources Institute who, appropriately enough, will be doing a ping-pong type presentation. We got Tan Xiaomei, who heads the Emerging Actors in Development Finance initiative at WRI. She was here last fall. If you need a really super succinct background on the trends of China's investment, you have to go online and see her presentation that she gave last November. You're on our yearly plan, Xiaomei. You have to speak every year for the China Environment Forum now. And she's going to be speaking with Kirk Herbinson about the work that, between the two of them, talking about how WRI has been doing some very active engagement with Chinese oil companies, and one of the countries where they're investing is in Uganda. So we're going to get a view of some of the engagement they're doing with the Chinese oil companies and governments and financial institutions, and also Kirk from on the ground in Uganda reporting about reaching out to the civil society groups there, which appear to be very well organized. So it's going to be a kind of a cool story. And the closing picture today is Motoko Aizawa, who is from the IFC, International Finance Corporation. She's the head of the Policy and Standards Unit in the Environmental and Social Development Department. It's known for long titles in your organization, clearly.
Old title.
That's your old title. Oh, we ripped the wrong bio off the website. So you got to get them to update your webpage, man. But so she's going to be talking to us about the work that she's been doing, engaging Chinese financial institutions, green credit policy, et cetera. So I like trying to keep my intros this short, which I haven't done yet, but I'm shortening it now. So we're going to invite you to talk, and I also have to remind the speakers, make sure you do speak into the microphones. And Pete, get the PDF up, PowerPoint up, and then we're ready to go. Need coffee, scones, good stuff, grab it, and enjoy.
Thanks, Jennifer, very much. This is a platform I used to come for information regarding U.S. and China, and now I'm really happy to be also the one sharing with my experience both abroad, globally, also back in China. Now, after study, working in many years outside, I'm now back in China already 5 years, believe it or not. I even have a hard time to believe that. So what I try to give is some view of the world, view of China, but through a WWF lens. WWF, known in the U.S. as World Wildlife Fund. Globally, we are known as Worldwide Fund for Nature, but the WWF and the Panda, I guess you have seen Panda, is you can recognize us everywhere. So what I have given, I put a Chinese words in there. I guess you will know some of them. It's called, I couldn't translate it to 困境, but it's more of a difficult place we're in a hard and rock, between rock and hard place. And the measure we see, or we see others are doing, actually some of the panelists we work for example, with WRI in China, Motoko, we are in the same task force, the China Council for International Environment and Development put together, look at the trade, investment, and the environment in China. So that's we are somehow all linked in this small world. What I try to give is, where should I point? Okay. This is a status of the world that we see from WWF lens, that if you see the first go this way, guys. This line shows the biodiversity decrease over the past 40 years. And this line shows the human impact, our need on the natural services and natural resources has grown over the past 40 years. And the line in the middle is one Earth, one planet can provide. So in the middle 70s, as a whole, as a human being, we have exceeded the world's the capacity to support us. We are now using 1.2 planet, which we all know we don't have them. Where the other half coming from? From our future generations, we borrow from them. From our previous generations, they have saved. We are just wasting them too quickly. And from maybe in the same generation, we are borrowing from some other part of the world. So this just shows this is a global per capita ecological footprint, which means global per capita need and natural resources, and that's the world. This is part of a Living Planet report WWF published every 2 years. And I just give it two places. One is China, and now in the middle, average. And then this is U.S.
So we're still close to number one.
The big ones are United Arabic Emirates,
Qatar,
yeah.
Denmark.
Yeah, per capita. This per capita. But why China is still in the middle, is still under the global average, but we have to work in China because this per capita, so the overall footprint is big. And China has become an economic engine in our world economy, growing really fast. So with that trend, we only know that in the future it's going to be just more, per capita even more. We found out with the urbanization, the per capita footprint is going up. With the GDP increase going up. So this is just all saying that's going up. We're going up. What we should do? So in China, we published another called China's Ecological Footprint Report. We've done this 2 issues already. One in 2008, look at the 2005 situation. One in 2010, November last year, look at 2007 situation. So we plan to do every 2 years to give a indication of how the situation is going. So this is a link. It's difficult to remember link.
We'll put it on our website too.
I put a report to Pete. So if you need, there's electronic version. You can go for that. In there, wrong place. Yeah. In there, we just give a very, very indicative picture of what is the trend in the past. So this figure, just remember this. The lower one is the human demand on nature. The upper at the before 70s, this line is really the biocapacity with the resources China has. And you can see that in the 70s, mid-70s, China's need on the natural resources exceeds what China can supply. And now China is using 2.2 times what China can supply. But bear that in mind, when China need that more, we had this study done that about 20-something% are used to produce the need from a globe, because China is a global manufacturer. It means need from you, me, and others in this part of the world requiring China to produce, but then they use resources there, but also resources from other parts of the world. So that's really the how to call it, dilemma of globalization. We have a more access, but then we need more. And then somebody like China producing for everybody, consuming themselves, but also for others consume. And then they need resources everywhere to meet that need. So that's really, we are all into that. So this is just to an indication. And the other thing I want also to show you one interesting graph is that look at the China's investment in Africa. When China is considered to be, trying to get resources everywhere, and what is the situation there out. That's also the theme for this panel and for our talk. So I just show you one study that our partner has done that to show the correlation of China's investment and in Africa and the growth in Africa. So before 1996, there's no correlation. You see the lines just all over. But then you see after 96, even during the financial crisis, China's investment in Africa correlates to Africa's growth more than 96%. I think I heard now recently it's a 0.99 something correlation. That also shows that when China produces for the world, they also their work in Africa also is the driving power for Africa to develop. So that's really the situation we're facing, how we see the world through our lenses. Other speakers from WWF has talked about this initiative we're talking about. We call the China for a Global Shift, looking at both how so the theory of change is that you have to change the brain before you can change the hands. You can change hands, but you change one finger, the other fingers do other things. So that theory we wanted to really change the overall thinking of how China look at the ecosystem services, natural resources, environment protection, together with their economic growth and the social well-being. So that's what we try to do. So first thing we try to do is to bring this attention as high as possible, as wide as possible in China. So second, we try to do is we think that there are some good policies in China, but the companies working on the ground sometimes don't do as they're supposed to do. We try to understand why. We think the financial sectors play a key role in there, because if they require everything follow the policy, then their lending will guide where the investment could go. So that's why we work with the financial sectors in China together with other partners, like Motoko can talk more. The third one, we try to see China's operations outside, because a lot of questions, complaints, as Jennifer mentioned, are all up because a lot of China's operations outside. So we look at what major operations they have outside. Economic, I didn't mean diplomatic, all that economic. We look at both these three types. One is the investment, the merger and acquisition that they have outside, directly investment. The second is really the contracting for projects for others. The third one may be the trade movement between. And we notice that currently our study shows that the contracting work, they have been working outside China, is a big portion among the three. So we did a little survey about who are the contractors, what are the incentives for them to change or not changing, try to understand more. And we're thinking to do more on the investment side in the future. So that's the third area we try to look into. The fourth area, which I think is critical, that China, yes, we see them extractive resources everywhere, but China also have something else that others don't have. the production in China can drive almost the cost of everything down to the level that is affordable, and also some good level of quality. So, and also China is investing very heavily on the renewable industries in China, and they see this as a next growth of economic development, or this is the next position they can take at the global competitiveness. So we're thinking if they can really drive all the renewable solutions, product technology down to the cost down to the levels affordable to all the world, then we can all reduce our footprints. You buy product produced in China, but then it's for lamps. Let me see. You don't have a CFL lamps. So I'm just saying if so LED or so those, if it's affordable, we can all reduce together. So that's we try to find out what is a solution available that can benefit to the world. So jointly benefiting. So that's really how our initiative looking at how their impact on the ground through our lenses. So that's just I guess I leave some for discussion. I just briefly talk about here now, and. So we actually started work in Africa. I can tell you, I quote my colleagues say, when they do a plan to the work, everywhere they lift their heads, they found China. They found China everywhere. So I got a request from all over the world, our offices all over the world, to talk about we want to work with China one way or another. Then we have to think about it. We are NGO. We are living on the memberships, generous donation. We are working on, living on the donation from grants from government agencies, companies. So we have to really see with limited resources where we think we can make changes. So that's 4 areas I just mentioned. We as a WWF think we can start making some changes, and that's all because I think my next slide is about that. Hold on. Wrong. Yeah, it's all because we do see the internal drive of China wanting to change. So I give this outline of the 12th five-year plan for China. And I guess you know China more. I don't have to explain the 5-year plan. Interestingly, the people in the world sometimes have different perception about that. My Russian colleagues once when I told them the 5-year plan is so important in China, he basically say, forget about that, because China learned from Soviet Union, and we already don't use them anymore. They didn't work in Russia anymore. But I said it's different. In China, it does work. Any issue goes into the 12-year plan, got implemented, got strictly measured, and then reporting back in the next 5 years. So everything we want to do in China is better. Let's get into there. So that's also indication of where China is going. So I just give it next 2 slides just about this. So this is a proposal by the party. I guess my Chinese colleagues would also seen them. So in the 4 areas, they talk about balancing the economy. Let me see. Improving the social equity and protecting the environment and continue going global. So this is the 4 major areas they're going to look in the next 5 years. And we just had the draft. Next slide is going to be really busy, but I will leave that just for everybody to read and use. So we also find there are many sectors, ministries, even companies, institutions doing their own 12th five-year plan everywhere. So we found this some text for the next 5-year plan. But I just give you some. It's very busy, so I will speak slowly and for you to be able to read. So we found the key messages that in that 5-year plan initial draft is talk about develop a resource efficient and environmentally friendly society, because the realization of a resource become a constraint just so strong. Natural resources, water, land, air, it's all up to the limit, so that's really going. And they're trying to green growth, so they grow, but also have some green components in there. And then they will have a conservation culture. This word is interesting. When 2006, I think 2005, when this word just came out of the 11th five-year plan, the first translation into English is conservation culture. But in Chinese, it literally means ecological civilization. But that word doesn't mean anything to people outside China. So there's a ping pong going on how to call it. But basically they say we grow, but within the limit, natural resource can support us. So that's really the concept we have, we believe in wholeheartedly in that. We're happy to see that it's going. And they are going to focusing on energy efficiency and coping with climate change. So I will not go to each details, but the main key message from there, they talk about energy conservation, environmental protection, ecological conservation, which I just mentioned, carbon emission target, and a new energy target. So I leave you to read. My thinking is we just took the related part we love to see. Okay, it's not a whole plan. You will see whole plans about economy, social, education, all that. But we took the one that we believe really happy. We are really happy to see that's in there. We're also going to really work from within China and work with the partners inside and outside China, try to achieve what they have put in a target, which we believe is a good target to achieve. So we can really achieve together. We believe that if we cannot succeed in China, we have a very, very high possibility of we are not succeeding in the world to reduce overall our intake of natural resources within the limit of one planet. So I will just stop here, and there are a few more slides from the report, but just for reference. But I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so we'll move on. Move the little clicker down to the ping pong team there, and that was good background. Appreciate that. And then here we go. Emerging Actors Initiative.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sure most of you know WI very well. Just in case, WI is a global environmental think tank that goes beyond research and to put ideas into actions. In the past 20 years, WI's International Financial Flows and the Environment Program has sought to influence the investments by traditional financial institutions such as the World Bank, based on the assumption that this kind of institutions set the norm for the foreign investments worldwide. As we all know, this is no longer the case. The global landscaping is changing. Increasingly, emerging actors from China, Brazil, India, and elsewhere is beginning to have a footprint on development finance. As a result, last year, WI initiated a brand new project called Development Finance, or Emerging Actors in Development Finance. Kirk and I today, my colleague Kirk and I, will give you a brief introduction on this project. Our presentation will focus on three topics. One is the changing global landscape. That's the justification for our new project. Second is sustainable finance in China's foreign investment. And then finally, my colleague Kirk will wrap up by presenting our case study. This is an initial study. We just did a field trip, but haven't really started. Let's see the changing landscape. In the past 10 years, we see a dramatic change in the global economy is that emerging countries have been growing a lot faster than developed economies. In 2010, out of top 10 economies in the world, 4 are emerging countries. And according to the Euromonitor International's estimation, by 2020, China is likely to surpass the US, become the world's largest economy, and India will likely to surpass Japan, become the world's 3rd largest economy. So all those emerging countries will really become the top economies in the world by 2020, and by 2010, they are already playing a very important role. The second trend is that the South-South financial trade has increased dramatically. We can see between 1990 and 2008, the worldwide trade only expanded 4 times. However, South-South trade grew by 10 times. If we look at their figure, we can see China is a source, both a source and destination of South-South financial flow. And the trade between South America and Africa is still comparatively small. The third trend is the foreign investments by emerging countries are increasing dramatically. from 1995 to 2009, we can see that China's foreign investment, overseas foreign investment, has increased by 5 times. Actually, 2010's data has already been out. By the end of 2008, China's accumulative foreign investments reached 300 billion. So compared to 1995, that's over 6 times growth. Because of their economic growth, politically, these emerging countries also seeking new power. We can see that the number of sudden political partnerships and forums have expanded. We see these political groups like BRIC country, BASIC country, IBSA, and initiatives in Africa. All this is accompanied by their change in the economic power. So because of this global the changing global landscape, we can see that first it's a good thing that these emerging countries are increasing their overseas investment. Sorry, I'm so thirsty. It's a good thing because most developing countries, especially low-income countries, still relied on international financial flows to grow their economy. However, in some cases, these emerging actors have been willing to finance projects that have significant environmental and social consequences. This has raised a concern that these emerging actors are competing with traditional financial institutions through offering lower standards and less financial oversight. That's the concern. So is this concern justified? And what are the actual impact of emerging countries on traditional financial institutions and on those countries who receive their investments? How these emerging actors operate their overseas investments? All these issues are emerging issues and yet to be well understood. Our project, one of the important goals of our project is to understand these questions. So today, through China's case, we want to answer these questions. How significant are China's foreign investments? Where are these investments going? What are the drivers of China's foreign investments? Who are the emerging financial actors? What are China's environmental and social standards for foreign investments? What are the challenges for environmental, social, and sustainability? Eventually, we will use a case to really understand these questions. China's overseas investment started in 1992 when Deng Xiaoping initiated his famous Southern Tour in Shenzhen. He also made a speech, Southern Tour speech, in 1992. And very shortly after that, China established a China Export-Import Bank, established in 1994, in order to facilitate the export and overseas investments. On the policy front, we can see there are several important landmarks that really help to accelerate China's overseas investment as well as exports. You guys can go to the website to see these policy landmarks, but we can see from 2005, China really accelerated its overseas investments, jumped the total investment, accumulated investment, jumped from 50 billion to 2010 is 300 billion. That's the dramatic change happened from 2005 to 2020, this 5 years, especially during 2008 and 2009. Globally, the overseas investment has been shrinking because of financial crisis, but China has kept growing its overseas investments. Second, where are these investments going? We can see from the figure, most of China's foreign investments go to Asia, especially go to Hong Kong and Singapore. Because Hong Kong is part of China, so we say it's overseas investments, not really called foreign investments. It's over outside the mainland China, so overseas investment. And second largest volume go to South America, and third is North America. Africa is the fourth largest volume, but however, China's investment in Africa calls special attention, mainly because the investment in Africa is mainly related to oil and natural resources, so that calls more attention. What are the drivers of China's foreign investments? Behind China's aggressive investment overseas, there are three drivers. The first is the need for new markets, better technology, and world-renowned brands. That's what the Chinese state-owned enterprises have been craving for: new markets, better technology, and brand new better brands. Second is demand for energy and natural resources. This is well known. Everyone thinks that's the main reason. There are other reasons. The third reason is bypassing trade barriers and tariff. Because of trade barrier, the dispute of trade barriers, and many Chinese companies feel it's better to just set up a joint venture or just direct wholly foreign-owned companies overseas and sell the products locally. That's in order to bypass trade disputes. So from this figure, we can see China's consumption of commodities as a share of world total. Except oil and lead, all other major commodities, China is the #1 consumer. So China is a world factory. That name is well deserved. And the percentage we can see on the left-hand side, it shows the Chinese consumption take what percentage of global consumption. So who are the emerging financial actors in China? In terms of total assets, by 2009, the largest bank is ICBC, is the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. The second is CCB, is China Construction Bank. Third is Bank of China. But in terms of providing loans to export and foreign investments, there are two policy banks who played key role. One is China Export-Import Bank. Second is China Development Bank. Let's take a good look at China Export-Import Bank. We say China Exim Bank. The mission is to finance. It was established in 1994, as I told. The only mission is to finance and implement the government's trade and overseas investment policies. It has three major tools. One is to provide export sellers credit. Second is to provide buyers credit. And third is to provide international guarantees. Through these three mechanisms, the China Exim Bank has really been pushing China's investment overseas. And in terms of scale, by far, China Exim is the largest export credit agency in the world. In 2009, it approved over $70 billion in new lending. That's bigger than the total lending that's approved by U.S., Japanese, and Brazilian export credit agencies. So we look at this figure down here. China Exim 2009's export seller credits, where it goes, we can see 31% goes to support overseas investment projects. Another 31% goes to support the export of high and new tech products. So what are China's environmental and social standards for foreign investments? It's under construction now. We say domestically, the Chinese government has already strengthened the environmental and information disclosure standards, but only domestically. In terms of China's investment overseas, all those guidelines, policies are still under construction. So we say China is developing guidelines for overseas lending and investments. Here, from this figure, I just put all the important landmarks that related to overseas investments into this figure. You can see early in 2004, because of the international pressure, China Exim Bank briefed environmental guidelines by China, just to say that in its overseas loans, the bank does consider the impact on environment and social consequence. That's what the bank has been saying, but definitely it's not a mandatory policy. It just say in its consideration. Currently, you guys can go back to see later if you want to know more details. But currently, China is developing this guideline, and by this summer, WI is going to cooperate with a Chinese environmental organization called Global Environmental Institute to publish a policy brief on China's guidelines, environmental and social guidelines on overseas investments. So you guys can come to our WI website, check out our publication. So what are the challenges for environmental and social sustainability? We categorize four main challenges. One is to monitor green finance policies. Monitoring green finance policies overseas is pretty much impossible. There is no institutional arrangement, and there is no mandatory policy. So even though domestically China has this green finance policies, and Motoko has published an article about that, but it's only for domestic enterprises. Overseas, totally no institutional arrangement. Second is developing overseas standards. China is thinking of developing standards for different sectors overseas and in overseas enterprises. However, it needs lots of specific regulations in terms of different countries, and this is the capacity the Chinese banks and those multinational companies don't have. So the capacity is a big issue. Third is implementing standards. One is policy. You need to have mandatory policy. Second is once these mandatory policies are set up, how to implement them, how to enforce them, that's another big issue. Fourth issue is providing access to information. Always when it comes to Chinese issue, people always worried about information, don't have enough clarity, don't have enough data. We don't understand, we don't really know what's the scale of investment overseas and what's the real impact. All this, we want to dip into it, but it takes time, and still it's a constant challenge. That's it. I will pass to my colleague, Kirk.
So as part of WI's research, we are also doing some case studies on the ground to help better understand both the demand for change and perceptions from people living in the host countries, as well as the perceptions of the Chinese companies that are operating overseas. So just one caveat that this research is in the very early stages, so we will welcome feedback. Might not be able to answer all of your questions on this. So we began with Uganda as our first case study. The reason why is because when you think about oil and gas in Africa, what immediately comes to mind is a legacy of long, complicated conflict. And in Uganda, it's different because it's a clean slate. Uganda has become Africa's newest oil producer. It's just starting right now, so we thought it would be an interesting take to see what happens from the very beginning, where there's not already this legacy of difficult issues. And then we also see this as an opportunity that we like to frame for Chinese companies to demonstrate how their engagement on the ground can lead to greater success and development. So basically, I won't go into all the details. This will just be a very quick overview. What's happening in Uganda? They have discovered oil in the mid-2000s. Operations are expanding very rapidly right now. There's one Chinese company is already involved in drilling, CNOOC. It's involved in drilling in Lake Albert, which is in western Uganda, which happens to be the most biodiverse area in Africa. So far, CNOOC is only one of several operators. There's also a UK company and a French company involved. But because of the expansion plans, China is very well positioned to play a greater role in further development of oil blocks, development of a potential pipeline, and also a refinery for the region around Uganda. So as some background, a number of extractive companies are increasingly taking environmental and human rights risks very seriously. The reason for this is not just for goodwill, but also for good business. It can harm the bottom line. So up here on this chart are a number of different examples of the types of risks of how environmental and human rights can actually harm a company's operations. And I won't go through this in detail. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. Reputational risk is the biggest example, but there's also examples of projects that have been stopped in operations. There's been examples of host governments changing their permitting and laws, as well as a number of other risks. But one thing I wanted to add on this, so there's a lot of speak in the extractive sector about environmental and human rights risks. Within Chinese companies, there's a discussion of these risks that's beginning right now. The way that a lot of Chinese companies are thinking of this are as two traps, the environment trap and the community trap. So I wanted to look at what's happening in Uganda through these two frames of the environment trap and the community trap. So first, the environment trap. As the oil and gas sector expands, there's a number of different risks that can take place. First of all, the largest one is probably the loss of biodiversity, because the oil and gas development is overlapping with with this very biodiverse region, with all the national parks, which are a major source of tourism for Uganda and revenue for local communities. There's also a number of very specific environmental risks, such as one example that I like to use that I heard when I was in Uganda is that because of the operations, elephants that are migrating through the area they're very sensitive to noise and to light, and and to smells. So there's been gas flaring in operations. This has disoriented many of the elephants, which require in their herds a knowledge, communication with each other to migrate. So they've changed their migration patterns, and they started to migrate at night. And as a result, they're starting to migrate, in some cases, through communities' croplands and through the villages themselves, causing further damage. Another example is potential for water pollution or oil spill. CNOOC is operating in Lake Albert. Lake Albert is in a very mountainous region. Oil spills that happen, the ecosystem is not going to have the strength to process the oil. For example, the Gulf of Mexico, much bigger area where the oil can disperse. Lake Albert, very contained. What's going to happen there would stay there. And then another example is that there's no clear emergency response plans for what could happen. The community trap. One of the big concerns on the ground is that I think in general from the civil society groups and parliamentarians and community people that I spoke to, they welcome oil and gas development. They think it's very important for economic development. But the plans are very not clear right now. It's expanding rapidly, and no one knows where. There's a lot of specific risks that could happen to communities. There's reduced access to clean water from the people that rely on fishing for their livelihoods in the lake, for example. There's potential for conflict because the oil and gas development is occurring along an area bordering on Democratic Republic of Congo, Southern Sudan, and that area where different geopolitical issues could spill over the border. There's also issues of potential, there's already land grabbing that's happening because the expansion is not clear. So different people are trying to buy up land and gather it. And often this land that they're gathering is communal land that indigenous peoples rely on. They're grabbing this land in order to sell it when that becomes marketed for oil development. So you have the environment trap and the community trap. Avoiding the environment and community traps. So one solution that we're looking at in this case study, because we work very closely with civil society groups on the ground, is we're looking at the role of civil society in helping Chinese companies to avoid the environmental and community traps. So this slide here just gives some examples of some of the benefits that a constructive relationship with local civil society could bring. So I put here, there's communication channels with affected communities. There's watchdog role that many of the civil society groups play to make sure that the revenue that's being generated is actually being used as it's intended. There's technical expertise on biodiversity risks and environmental impact assessments and strategic environmental assessments. There's an understanding of local political dynamics, And I put this diplomatically, there's third-party perspectives on company performance, another role for civil society. So I guess before I go into that slide, so what we're trying to promote in this case study and in our engagement both with Ugandan civil society and with Chinese companies in Beijing is to try to build a bridge for greater interaction between civil society groups and local communities on the ground and the Chinese companies and try to build it into their business model. There's a number of challenges with doing that, and these came up. They're very clear in Uganda. For example, as you probably know, there's a tendency for the Chinese companies operating in Uganda to keep the workers that they bring over separate from the local population. There's tremendous language and cultural barriers that automatically make communication very difficult. Their local companies have been approached by civil society groups, but the local branches will defer to the offices in Beijing and say, if you want to discuss these issues, you need to talk to Beijing. Ugandan civil society, unfortunately, does not have the resources at this point to go to Beijing and discuss these issues. And then among civil society and the media in Uganda, there's a suspicion that exists. There were phrases that were used such as that Chinese companies operate like a black box. Civil society groups suspect that they're very influential in the country, but they don't know how, and they don't know if this is beneficial or if it's harmful. There's also discussions in terms of finance. I heard phrases such as Chinese financial institutions are giving blank checks to the government for different operations. So there's a lot of misunderstanding and lack of communication that's going on. So as we go forward with this case study, we recognize these challenges, but we also see this as an opportunity for dialogue. We see both in Uganda, there's demand from communities and civil society for greater interaction with Chinese companies. And from our interactions with the Chinese oil companies, we see that there's demand for greater capacity to understand how to avoid the environment and community traps. We see this as potentially mutually beneficial, and so if you have any feedback on as we go forward with this, we welcome it. Do you want to close with any comments? Okay, thanks.
Can I ask one quick question to clarify? What is WRI? So your role is the yenta, you're the matchmaker, or the platform for these parties to come together? Because maybe just take 1 minute to talk about what you're doing with the oil companies in Beijing.
At this point, our role is research at this point and identifying this as a challenge. And then I think because we have both civil society contacts and we're developing Chinese oil company contacts, we could help to bridge and convene. That's a common thing that WRI does is convene stakeholders from different groups. So we see potential for this.
Okay.
Before the convening,
go to the microphone. Sorry.
Before the convening, we want to first raise the awareness among Chinese multinational companies. Let them know they realize it's an important trap, the traps they are facing. But we have to inform them, really let them know how the civil society works. So afterwards, we can put them together. That's the goal.
Okay, good. We will dig deeper in the Q&A. Okay, quick applause for the ping pong presentation. And now let's hear about what the IFC is doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation to present our work in China. I'm very glad that it worked out, that Lin Li is in town, and I'm on this panel together with colleagues from WRI. First of all, a word about my institution. IFC is part of the World Bank Group. We are the largest source of multilateral financing to private enterprises in emerging markets. And what's unique about our business model is that we combine investments with advisory services. And together, we try to achieve sustainable development outcomes on the ground. So we use various instruments and interventions and different financial instruments to achieve our outcomes. And among those, perhaps what we're better known for our sustainability policy and performance standards framework and our work with the Equator Principles. For those of you who are not familiar with the Equator Principles, that is a environmental and social risk management framework for commercial banks, used particularly in connection with project finance, which is a particular type of financing. So that is just one example of an instrument that we use in connection with our operations. But that is combined with various thematic strategies as well as investment strategy and then country strategies. And so first of all, I just want to give you a sense of what we do in China. And I'm just going to skip a little bit. I mean, if you'd like to see the detail of what we have in terms of our climate change agenda, please look at the slide. Obviously, climate change is a huge pillar at IFC, and we've tried to embed this consideration into all sorts of different levels of activities that we have. In terms of our China strategy, it is a combination of climate change, equitable growth, and supporting global China, these three angles. So when we combine climate change and our China strategy, basically we have our climate change interventions in China. And these are roughly in the four areas here: market-driven solutions, renewable energy activities, new technology activities, and policy and advisory assistance. And it's the last box that I would like to focus today. But before I go into the details of what we are doing in China, I just want to give you a context. And obviously, you're very familiar with the pattern of rapid economic growth and massive consumption of energy and natural resources, and massive environmental pollution and biodiversity loss in China. And this is resulting in growing social tension and inequality. If you speak with the Ministry of Environmental Protection officials, they would say that this is a security issue for China. And therefore, these issues are were very prominently featured in China's 11th FiveYear Plan, and continues to be the case with the current FiveYear Plan, which is very interesting because the minute the environmental issues show up there are also targets, and then there are all sorts of implementation mechanisms to ensure that those targets are met. And increasingly, I think that there is recognition in China that the command and control mechanisms that were favored and continue to be favored in various parts of the government need to be coupled with market-based policies. So the hammer approach isn't necessarily going to work always, and that you're going to need some incentives. So China, I would say in the mid-2000s, turned to the power of the market, and a lot of thinking happened in the Environmental Protection Ministry. And basically, a series of proposals got made, which I think they're calling environmental economic policies. So these are sort of market-based interventions to try to improve the overall state of the environment in China. Anything from environmental tax to ecological compensation mechanism, looking at China's trade policy, green government procurement policy. And in terms of the private sector, they have made proposals on green insurance, green securities, and green credit. These three policies in particular are very much of interest to us, because these are measures that we also use internally and in our advisory work to try to come to achieve certain outcomes on the green side, or in fact, climate change, or even on social development side. But anyway, let me focus a little bit on the green credit policy. I think it's a very interesting thing that China focused on this, because Chinese banks provide about 80 to 90% of needed capital for the Chinese enterprises. That's a very, very high number, meaning the capital markets are less active in providing funding to Chinese enterprises yet. And as a result, the desire is to really work on Chinese banks to be the actors to bring environmental change so that they can be motivated to be part of a bunch of actors that will achieve Chinese environmental transformation. So the core of the green credit policy has dual purpose. First is to direct credits away from bad enterprises. And these are basically high polluting, high energy consuming enterprises and projects. But there's a flip side to it. And this is to encourage Chinese banks to direct credits toward energy consumption, emission reduction, and green projects at preferential rates. Oftentimes, when people talk about the green credit policy, they focus very much on the thou shall not part. But there is also the positive aspect to this. China launched this green credit policy in July of 2007. And it announced that this policy is going to be a joint venture among 3 agencies, among the Ministry of Environmental Protection, the Chinese Banking and Regulatory Commission, and also the People's Bank of China. Now, this is a very interesting thing that these 3 agencies are involved, because China in the mid-90s did have a green credit policy, which at that time was advocated by the People's Bank of China only. And so learning the lesson from that policy, which really didn't go far in implementation at all, they decided that it's key to have these 3 interagency collaboration. And they play under the policy very different roles and a complementary role. So that is an innovation based on the lessons learned from the 1995 policy experience. So what are the implementation challenges? And there are many. Among the policymakers, first of all, they are having to learn to work together. The environmental agencies having to understand the role of the financial markets and different market instruments, and the financial agencies having to learn about environmental protection and social development issues. And all of them having to understand what it means to incentivize the financial sector. These are huge challenges. And the flip side is that the financial institutions also have huge challenges. They're going to have to learn very quickly systems and procedures to embed environmental risks into bank credit reviews. They're going to have to access practical tools to actually implement environmental and social risk management, and also identify business opportunities. They're going to have to overcome the barriers for energy efficiency and renewable projects. In China, as you can imagine, under the centralized planned economy, banks really didn't have to do a lot of thinking. They basically did whatever the states asked them to do. And now there's still a leftover of that era where they were very much allocating credit at the state's direction. So for them, taking additional risks in energy environment, energy efficiency, renewable energy projects, when they can do pretty much formulaic lending, it's a huge challenge for them to get out of that mindset, to lend in those segments. And also understanding incentives. Well, they have to understand, first of all, that they can actually take risks. They are allowed to take risks. And that by taking risks, that there are going to be returns. And so that market dynamics, the banks still need to understand. So in this context, I think that the policymakers had a huge challenge. And they turned to IFC, or actually we knocked on their door, the Minister of Environmental Protection's door, shortly after they announced the green credit policy in June of 2007. And by the time we arrived on their doorsteps in September, we were told by the MEP, We were waiting for you. Where have you been? So it was a very interesting opening conversation. By then, they knew who we were. They knew our work on the performance standards. They knew the Equator policy, Equator principles very much. They were particularly interested in the Equator principles. So we quickly entered into a partnership first with MEP. We entered into a cooperation agreement, and later cooperation agreement with the China Banking Regulatory Commission. And first of all, we facilitated the policy dialogue among the different agencies, because the MEP is responsible for putting out environmental compliance information, so that that information can be used by banks in connection with their credit activities. And then the banking regulator needs to monitor how banks are doing in terms of lending or curtailing of lending. And on top of it, the People's Bank of China has been in the process of putting out a huge credit information infrastructure. And therefore, all of these things need to work together for this green credit policy to work. And as a result, we tried to facilitate the policy dialogue among these different agencies. We also tried to come up with specific instruments or tools for banks to be able to use in their credit adjudication. So, for example, we jointly published a green credit handbook with the MEP, and this includes the translation of the Equator principles, the performance standards, and the EHS guidelines, which are very, very sector-specific, because MEP was very interested in sectoral approaches to environmental regulation. More recently, we have worked with MEP to help them put out their first China Green Credit Policy annual report, because MEP had to start somewhere, and so that some kind of a retrospective was considered to be adequate. We are currently now working with CBRC on their guidelines to enhance monitoring and evaluation of the green credit policy. And hopefully we have more information to put out in this area over the summer. Currently we're in very early stages of a bilateral discussion on this policy document. We have also worked with a lot of different actors inside China to help raise awareness on green credit and to help train the trainers and to create networks. So with PBOC and later with CBRC, we have done training events where they have pulled in both regulators, state-owned banks, policy banks, local environmental regulators, smaller municipal banks, et cetera, try to raise awareness. Also, interestingly, China was very interested in communicating what they are doing in this area with other countries. And Vietnam was very interested in understanding what China was doing in the green credit area. So we facilitated study tours between China and Vietnam, also China and Brazil, so that that South-South network can be created. We also brought in interested Equator banks to have dialogues with Chinese banks, and so on and so forth. We also have complementary activities on China's green securities policy, which I don't have time to go into this morning. So these are the various levels of partnership activities that we are engaged on currently on green credit. We also provide strategic advice to Chinese banks because, as you can imagine, they are very hungry and thirsty for knowledge to try to understand what overseas banks are doing in this area. So we don't provide specific capacity building for individual banks per se, but we act as a strategic provider of information, global information in this area, and try to match banks up with Equator banks, and also try to match them up with various resources. In this connection, we're very happy that one Chinese bank became Equator, the industrial bank, which is not the same as the ICBC, the giant, but the smaller joint stock bank that has been very, very interested in energy efficiency, renewable projects since the 2005-2006. And we also have an MOU with China Exim on information exchange, on environmental and social sustainability and capacity building, so on and so forth. So here, again, we are in ongoing dialogue with one of the policy banks. So progress to date, exactly what has the green credit policy achieved so far? First of all, I think domestically there is more accessibility of environmental compliance data in China. And this is thanks in large part to MEP putting out additional information. And this is then being disseminated through various channels, including the media. So MEP used the media quite effectively to put out, for example, blacklisted enterprises that are not compliant with Chinese environmental law. And so this is a very interesting collaboration with the media that we are observing. And as a result, I think that there is more enhanced transparency in China. You might call it baby steps, you might call it giant steps, depending on your perspective. But I think that that is an interesting development. Also, provincial and local governments are having to set targets, having to at least go through the motions of ensuring that they are doing something in the green credit area. So there are municipal regulations, there are provincial regulations in the green credit area, which is interesting. The financial sector are very much actively participating. I think they're interested. There's obviously recognition that this is a potential way to differentiate a bank from their competitor. And so there is interest, and there are a lot of study groups and information exchange. But as I said, there has only been one Chinese bank that has been able to cross the threshold in terms of Equator. Others are actively studying Equator. So basically, credits have been denied, credits have been curtailed, and there's some data in the article that I have published with the Vice Minister of MEP. This is a way to just get a lot of data out. And so if you're interested in data, you'll find some in this article. I have only 5 copies here, but if you're interested, please pick these up. I think it is definitely the case that leading Chinese banks are improving their systems. And here we only sort of hear anecdotal improvements, stories about banks, organization, banks, internal guidelines, internal study groups, and presidents of banks taking sort of public stance in this area. So we can only imagine that this is sort of a ongoing progress that's happening in banks. And overall emerging transparency I already talked about. But there's a lot that needs to be done. In terms of looking ahead, yes, there's availability of information, but that this obviously needs to be stepped up, and updates need to be provided. Various implementation tools are definitely needed. Banks need local expertise to be able to so that they can hire them to do environmental assessments. They are aware that there are overseas, foreign consultancies available, but they're really not in the business of paying for these services. They're not in the habit of paying money to get these expertise. They're going to have to learn that they have to put some money on the table, and that they're going to have to be able to access local capacity that they feel comfortable. So Chinese local expertise is a huge challenge. Create incentives all the way around. Incentives for banks, incentives for enterprises, incentives for local expertise, all the way around. This is very, very important. I would also say that the enabling environment that is created through the combination of green securities, green insurance, and green credit is going to help business easier for both real sector companies and financial institutions. For example, if there are green insurance schemes, so that banks can rely on that as a risk mitigation mechanism, so that if there's a chemical spill, and cleanup necessities, that banks can rely on those instruments as a risk mitigation measure. That is going to help very much, and we've already made this recommendation to the government of China. And finally, building environmental and social sustainability in China's growing overseas finance is a key, as we all agree, I'm sure, in this forum. And in this regard, it's just very interesting to watch right now this race for setting those standards for China's overseas activities. And I would say that this is a very fascinating development that is occurring in multiple agencies, including SASEC, which has its own CSR guidelines. And when you read them, they are unbelievably progressive. Now, the key, obviously, is implementation. And the key is to get Chinese overseas investments to actually heed those guidelines, and those guidelines only apply to state-owned enterprises. So there's a hole vis-a-vis the private sector investments. So in terms of the private sector, again, there are sort of sectoral initiatives to address those investments. So that is, this is the year to watch, right? In terms of what's going to happen with all those indigenous domestic attempts to come and capture Chinese overseas investments and the standards that they have to abide by. So finally, is this enough? Is all of this enough? Are we doing enough? Are things moving fast enough? Because obviously what China wants to do is to cross the river by feeling the stones. And it's a very, very cautious approach that we are all very familiar with. But at the same time, I would say that, if we gathered here 5 years ago and sort of bashed our heads on what's happening in China, could we have dreamed 5 years hence that this is the state of play in China? Probably not. I couldn't have, right? When I walked in this building this morning, I saw this event being advertised, and there was another event that sort of enigmatically said invitation only. And I saw Brazil, renewable energy, private sector investment. So there's some other conference going on Brazil. I've been working with Brazil also about the same duration as I've been doing things in China. And there the state of play is very different. China had a green credit policy in '95, right? Brazil had about the same time its Protocol Verde, mid-90s. There was that global sort of movement, probably prompted by the development community in the mid-90s. Now, interestingly, Brazil repledged their allegiance to Protocol Verde in 2008-9, thereabouts. But not a lot has been done. And recently, fueled by their domestic economic growth, the domestic scene in Brazil is very different. Sure, there are 5 equator banks in Brazil. Yes, there's all this interesting developments in the Amazon. Tons of money going in and tons of money being invested in Brazil, but not necessarily with the same kind of stewardship that you are seeing in China. Now, this is the sort of the stereotypical difference that one would expect in Brazil. Things are much more organic, and things are a little bit chaotic, and things are very interesting. But nonetheless, the reason why we're seeing this development in China is because the state is committed, and there are interesting actors within the state agencies as well as in the private sector. So I would like to end on a cautiously optimistic note here. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Again.
And keep that slide up for a second if you don't mind. Thanks. Because this slide, this brings to mind that these kinds of challenges. I mean, I'm kind of wondering, who can really help with these challenges, Motoko? That we see that, maybe bilateral, the World Bank, this is some capacity building at the local level. Or what about multinational corporations who want to green their supply chains? I mean, one challenge I see is that a lot of China's domestic production is done by these small and medium enterprises who, even if they wanted to get a loan, the banks won't deal with them because they're too tiny. Is that, so I'm just kind of curious that, are there organizations, you guys are kind of moving in that direction. WWF and WRI. Do you see other organizations moving in or who could move in to work on some of these challenges?
Well, Jennifer, the thing about China is that there is no shortage of actors wanting to engage in China, right? Everybody wants to make a difference in China. So the good news is that everybody is in China in one capacity or another. So anything from multilaterals, bilaterals, think tanks, universities, business associations, multinationals, etc. They're a civil society. They're all there. The key is to be able to converge some of these things, right? So that the recommendations, the activities, the policy interventions, projects, that there is some convergence so that it really makes a difference to the government's perception. Because, it's one thing for, I was in China last April where we were talking about CSR in China, and, the standards organization going there saying, do FSR, do EITI, do this, do that, right? And the Chinese government is thinking, okay, very nice, thank you very much, but we really are kind of confused, right? So I think in order for us to really make a difference in China, some of these, I think I'm stating the obvious, but some of these things really need to converge, and we need to be speaking the same language, and that means, also giving up, ceding some of the territorial fights that we have in China, and act as a coalition, really. But I would also be interested in other views on this.
Yeah. Okay. But well, we can open up to the audience there. We've got can you come up here, Cushing? Let's come up here in front to Derek, and just ask you to speak in the mic so we can all hear you. Particularly in Webland, your voice might not be that loud.
Derek Scissors, the Heritage Foundation. This is to the WRI duo. You're using MOFCOM data for outward investment, and it's accurate but misleading. And it's misleading. There's even mentioned it because they claim that the bulk of the investment goes into Hong Kong. Hong Kong is treated as an external customs port for WTO reasons. Same thing as in trade, and it dominates outward investment, and that's just inaccurate. The money goes through Hong Kong somewhere else. In Uganda, the details of the big investment haven't been settled. That could actually count in Chinese figures as investment in Hong Kong, depending on how CNOOC wants to finance it. Right? There are other ways to track the investment. If you use those other ways, two interesting facts emerge. First of all, the total for Africa goes way up. And then second, and this applies to everybody in the room, and it might be useful, as you break down, this is by volume, it's not by project, so this is by dollars spent. 60% of Chinese outward investment is attributable to 7 centrally state-owned entities. CIC is not actually the leader, China Investment Corp. Sinopec and CNPC are the biggest outward investors. Then a couple of metals companies. If you look at engineering contracts, which I think Dr. Lee brought up, Sinohydro, large proportion of the volume of engineering contracts. So there's a lot of concentration. Now, the bad part about that is when you find out that CNPC and Sinopec are progressive, well, they have the most experience and they've been doing it the longest. So when you move down the food chain, you're going to find a lot less progressive companies. The good thing is they're not only control the bulk of the investment by dollar, but they are the exemplars for everyone else. If you can convert Sinohydro, CNPC, I'll pick a metals company at random, Min Metals, but there are a number of other metals companies active, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Everybody else will follow. There's a lot of possibility to work with just a handful of companies because of the concentration of outward investment, to work with just a handful of entities, I should say, not companies necessarily, and do wonderful things on the ground, even going beyond finance, which I agree is the correct way to look at this. And now I'm just going to plug where I'm getting this information from is called the China Global Investment Tracker from the Heritage Foundation, which actually tracks the investment by the companies, not using the attribution to Hong Kong. It matches MOFCOM aggregate data, but it breaks them down much more usefully. And so I'm not just making this up out of thin air, although I have people occasionally accusing me of doing that. after seeing the tracker. Anyway.
That's good. That's good. Yes, please do.
Thank you. Actually, our emerging actors in development finance, our project has two strategies. One is on the upstream, we engage with financial institutions. On the downstream, we directly work with China's multinational companies. Last month, I was in China. I was there 3 weeks. I engaged with a number of multinational companies, including CNPC. I went there. CNPC recently established a very big department called Global Oil Gas Resources Strategy and Department. So the group is very diverse. People working in the department come from different academic background, including sociology, political science, economics. And I presented our research, presented our project to them. They were so interested, and they say that they want to work with us. So following up, we will have a policy roundtable in Beijing on March 11th, and their the head of the department will come to our roundtable to present their initiative in terms of how to invest wisely overseas. That's what we work with. And I also talk with a number of mining companies. One of them is Wukuan Jituan. I'm not sure if you know. So they raised a number of issues that all these Chinese multinational companies face while they invest overseas. One big issue is that they don't know what they really face go out of China. For example, in China, we can take the example of Three Gorge Dam, their project. The companies, so many companies are involved. The companies go there, they only need to worry about the construction, the project itself. They don't need to worry about how to dislocate people. And all those things governments will take care of, local governments from central governments, a bunch of people. And you really don't need to worry about anything else except your project itself. But when you go to Wukuan Jituan, they recently opened a mine in Laos. They say it's terrible that the company, in addition to the construction, the mining itself, they have to take care of everything. They didn't know the village people didn't have food they had to take care of. They thought, as long as I work with your central government issued the license, let me to operate there. I'm fine. I just need to work on my project. I didn't know there's local communities I need to take care of, local governments, village heads I need to take care of. So many issues. They are so overwhelmed. So WI can work with them, inform them what they really face when you operate overseas, no matter it's financial institutions and the downstream direct operators overseas. That's what our strategy.
Let me just one small follow-up, but I think in this case, it sounds strange, but I actually have people from the Chinese government call and ask about the data because they don't want to use their own government data. And within Chinese corporate sector, the bigger, you guys have noticed this, certain Chinese companies have improved as outward investors tremendously in the last 5 years. They started off knowing nothing. And they still have a lot to learn, but they just do much better. And in the financial aspect, all the aspects. Other Chinese companies can learn from them, and you think, well, they should. They're all state-owned. Clearly, they talk to each other. Well, they don't.
No, they don't really.
At all.
They have a strange relationship among those oil companies, like CNOOC. Is so suspicious. I also engaged with CNOOC. I invited them to our policy roundtable. They said, "Oh, we are little brother among the oil companies. We have to see those two big brothers. What they do. If you invite us, we want to see what they are talking about." The relationship is extremely strange. Yeah.
Right, and it's even worse in the metals companies because there are actually only 3 national oil companies, but there are a lot of metals companies. One thing you guys could do, which sounds very odd, is serve as a broker between the better Chinese investors and the new Chinese investors, which is strange, but you see it all the time, that the new investors don't know what the more established investors learned 3 years ago. And I'll stop.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'd just like to follow up on this conversation. I think in my mind, China is going globe, but do they really have going globe strategy? I have to say, no, I don't think they have real strategy. They basically, as you just mentioned, everybody learn by their painful experience, and sharing almost no. So everybody going out to learn again, and the public service of them is also not well. So I see that when we talk about Chinese changing Chinese brain in China, but I also talk changing the hands and toes and fingers outside, right? I think once China going global, they are facing few challenges. I just write down. One is if you can call it culture, you can call it assumption. Like Xiaomei just mentioned, Chinese people assume if they go out, they just work with government. That's how China works. You work with government clear all the roads for you, and you just do your own business part of that, no social, no environment. When they go out, they have that in some assumption in their mind. So that's also why you see Chinese company in Africa, they just talk with the president, talk with the ministry, and then think they could get things done. Yes, they got a license of operation, but their social license of operation, which I could quote unquote, it's not really paper, but it's really how you can work on the ground with community. They sometimes don't have them because community hates them because they don't talk. And also community fear them. That's another culture side. Chinese tend to group them together. Even though Chinatown everywhere in the world, why they don't disperse? Because we try to figure out why there's Chinese want to be together. The Motoko mentioned, they have Chinese workers together, don't want to mingle. A lot of things is derived from a fear, from unknown. It's just a black box, so scary. Black box, nobody can get into, nobody can get information out. That's scary. But if you know Chinese, you go into that black box, they talk about nothing. Talk about really the same thing, or they talk about same thing as you do daily. What you eat, what you drink, but just because not unknown, that talk becomes such a mysterious talk, then the fear, the speculations all come out. So that's culture. Second, I would say the mindset. And mindset is different, how you operate. That's also, but we do see a change of mindset. That I guess the speakers all talk about that. I also, me as an NGO working in China, we work on policy, work on the field. We are researcher, but also implementer, practitioner in a way. I found from last year, July, August, a wide open arms about international NGOs. I cannot speak of national NGOs because I was not. I found a really welcome arms of that drawing us to them. In the past, it's you knocking the doors on them and they used to go away, basically. But now it's really come, let's work on something together, based most on the issue on environment, because that's our work. So that's really, I think, changing my mindset. You see the 12th five-year plan have a lot of more text on the environment, on ecosystem, on energy saving, on renewable energy. That's a huge change in mindset I can see. I always believe only you have an internal drive, you can make changes. Everybody want to pressure them, you make marginal. But only when they have an internal drive, and the China can change. And I do see that internal drive is there. Information. I heard a lot of Chinese companies complain to us saying the government doesn't help us. And we don't, so I would say you can hire a local lawyer or local consultant. They say, first of all, it's too expensive. Our project budget doesn't allow us. Second, we don't know even where to find it to know. So we learned that. We talked with the MOFCOM, Ministry of Commerce. On their website, they have a country-specific investment guidelines. In there, they put in the Chinese, what the country is about, what the issue, and what should be taken care of when you go there. And in their environment is very little tiny. So we try to really helping them to get some pilot countries to really have the environment situation laid out, put on the website in Chinese. So for companies, before they go in there, even if you don't have to talk with embassy, they go on the website, they will have enough information, and we'll put the resources behind for them to use. So really increasing the public service for them to go in globe. We talk with these key players in China saying, do we really have a going global strategy? No, feeling the stones crossing the river again. But it's painful. It's really painful. And Motoko said that others, really clubs and carrots. Carrots only work if they want to move with you. And the clubs is critical. That's, regulations. It's critical in China. I think Motoko, the case saying the same level of green lending policy in Brazil and in China, and you see China moving a lot. And also why we think 12th five-year plan is really important, because what China has this characteristic that we learned in the past 30 years. If they don't believe in anything, you try, it's hard to get in. But if they believe in something and they decide to do something, wham, you got it. Thank you.
No holding them back. Okay, got some other questions out there? Right here. Well, we get the mic over. And while you get the mic over, I should mention on March 16th, we're actually screening a film for the Environmental Film Festival called When China Met Africa. And it's not about these your big seven, Derek. I mean, this is about Chinese farming operations, but it's very insightful to some of the suspicions, but also, government, high-level government officials in various African countries coming to China. And, I mean, it's really insightful. So it's a free film. Bring your own popcorn. No, don't bring popcorn. But just wanted to mention that because I think it could be insightful.
Will you put it on the website? I don't want.
I don't know if the producer will let me do that, but we'll talk to him. We'll try. You know what? You guys could screen it in Beijing. That's what we'll do. All right. I just put a burden on you. Yes, sir.
Hello, Aron Sasueta from the Evaluation Office at the Global Environmental Facility.
Nice to meet you.
A couple of questions. One having to do with the idea of the 5-year plan and the increasing greening of China, as you've put it. What are the indications that indeed there are changes in the way that China is dealing with natural resources and environmental issues that affect their neighbors? For example, do we get any indication as to what's happening in the upper Red River basin with the dams that are everybody's talking about, but there's no information about? We now have information about what's happening in the Mekong River, higher Mekong River basin, but not in the Red River basin, and those are huge issues that basically have implications that are dramatic for the Delta and for the South China Sea altogether. So, and the other question is for or rather a comment for WRI. Thank you both for everybody for very thought-provoking presentations. They were all quite good. But for WRI, yes, it's interesting that indeed we see the much of the aid, South-South aid, going through without the type of safeguards that generally take place through the multilaterals. But I should say too that much of the recent aid that is being paid, particularly through the carbon facilities, and the payments for services, in the context of the discussions of RED and RED Plus, much of this aid, and this is massive amounts of money that have come to Brazil, to Indonesia, to Guinea. This money is taking place through trust funds in the World Bank that don't have to meet the same requirements and the same safeguards that say normal bank operations have to meet. So really, this notion of bilateralism that is much more relaxed in terms of their social and environmental criteria does not only apply to countries like China and Brazil. It applies also to the northern countries as well.
So who's going to leap on that dam question? DAM question.
I guess I can get a few.
And I could throw some things in.
Yeah, sure. Yes, if China is determined to do it, it will do it. However, China is not one China. China has a lot of components of its the government or society. Some would be doing what government really to ask strictly. Some would just pretending to do that and then bypass it. So that's just say. So depending on which expectation you have, you will see the progress either be minimal or great. So that's really what I want to put into context. And dam issue, first of all, I think 2 points I want to make is that China is really going on increases non-fossil fuel. If you look at my busy slide, they want to be 15% of non-fossil fuel. And in there, they think nuclear and hydropower are the ones going to drive them there, because solar and wind is only like less than 3% in total. Of course, as a WWF, as a conservation organization, we're really not encouraging the nuclear. We are not encouraging the big dams that have a huge ecological impact. So we are not really supporting that. I'm just saying that's how they see a way out. So for your question, if you notice the trend in the past few years, in the past, like a Mekong River, they even didn't go into the Mekong River Commission. They didn't talk about it out. But now they start to talk about it. I mean, that's really, depending really from where you think that maybe nothing, but it also opening. I think they are more sensitive to the waters that bounded with other countries. because inside they can pretty much control other information or way of doing that. Once you get into the international river, especially after 2005 Songhuajiang spill, chemical spill that's going to Russia, I think that was a tipping point. Then they start look at the international river carefully. And they may not reach the area like you, GF, or us, or everybody wanted to be there, but at least the dialogue there, the channel's open. They are putting observers into Mekong River already. They open discussion. I guess it has to be actors like you and me and us, in a way, to really make the issue up on the table and encourage more talk, encouraging all the stakeholders sit down on the table, make decision that benefits all. I'll stop there.
Just a small footnote on the same vein. I recently saw an internal document of the banking regulator that talked about the need for banks to pay attention to airshed and watershed issues. Yeah, I mean, it's unimaginable that banks now have to, think about. I mean, a few years ago, we would not have imagined that this kind of direction is going to be given from the banking regulator. So I agree that there is a higher level of awareness. And then the other thing is, I think there's a recognition that these international water issues, also international airshed issues, these are China's national security issues. The acid rain that's affecting Japan, Korea, for example. The MEP officials would say that this is a national security issue. So they're coming at it, not so much, from an environmental angle, but from a national strategic perspective as well.
Just want to note two things. One is that in our Choke Point China reporting with Circle of Blue, we will have a multimedia story that's trying to get what's happening right now in the dams. I mean, we do know that they're now talking green dams. I mean, they've been very silent on a lot of dam building since the big conflicts around the Nuzhang back in 2004, 2005. But we see that a lot of dams that have been halted because of community and NGO protest, it's let loose right now. But interestingly, with India, with the complaints about the damming in Tibet that would affect the Brahmaputra, that there is the presidents of, the leaders have agreed that the Chinese will share information and look into the impacts. And I mean, it may sound quite small, but I was amazed that they talked about it. But they're not talking about what the impacts of the potential Western South Northern Water transfer. It's another major infrastructure that could also have overseas impact if the Western line's built. I saw a hand. Where was that? Over here. Right here in front. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
You have to be a little bit more aggressive there.
I was just relaxing. Comfortable chairs. Very quickly on the red comment, I absolutely agree that by our focus, as we're turning more towards looking at the south-south flows and the standards and safeguards that apply, that does not in any sense imply that the multilateral institutions have gotten it right, although IFC is close. Don't quote me on that until the whole process. But yeah, so with RED in particular, the World Bank safeguards are actually, they just underwent a big review for the World Bank Group, and they're starting right now to overhaul their entire safeguards. And so I think it's actually going to start going two directions, where it's not just what happens in China over the coming year with development of the standards and increasing knowledge and experience with this will probably feed back into the World Bank and the way that they continue to develop these safeguards, and hopefully that'll apply to RED and so forth.
Okay, and you've got the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Isabel Galdes. I'm with the U.S. Export-Import Bank. So our role in this whole dynamic is actually really concrete and self-interested in terms of our goal, which is to support U.S. jobs. And I can imagine after listening to our exporting community that they would be rather shocked to hear this panel's conclusion in some respects, given the competitiveness concerns. So I wonder what you all would suggest that we could say as we approach these complaints from the exporting community in terms of how we can allay their fears that there is progress being made. Now, clearly, it seems that there isn't any type of an international standard at this point. We'll rally towards some. We would cross our fingers it could be the IFC. But until that time when the hand and the head connect, what can we do in terms of showing any progress? Maybe Motoko referenced something about measurable goals towards achieving their 12th five-year plan. Is there any type of information that we can use to make the case that steps are being taken by the business community, and that those steps somehow align with this governmental effort in this five-year plan? Thank you.
I can start. I can start.
Move on down the line.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's really good to hear the voice from the Exim Bank of U.S. Few things. What our earlier speaker Rose New has shown this audience, maybe not same audience, but you can find the CEF's website, two reports written by us and the PBOC, People's Bank of China, and Exim Bank, looking at both the financial sector's play in the China's environmental progressing, and also the equator principles application in China. So that's the two reports already existing. You can go to have a view, and then we are currently doing with CBRC. We do a benchmarking study between the Chinese banking's green lending policy and the equator principles. And once that's done, we will publish at least a summary of that report in English. It's gonna be in Chinese. Try to really see, because ICBC, International Commercial Bank of China, told us, they said our lending policy is better than equator principles. And I believe some parts maybe. So they said, what they said, they did a thorough study of equator principles, what does it mean, and then what that means in their work. So what we are doing is that we're doing the benchmarking with study to see how good and how bad they're comparing to this. So once that's done, we don't know yet. We have to really, that's going to be ended by June this year. So once that's done, we will publish some of our findings as a summary to share. I think that's going to be really interesting, and we will base our strategy with them, because we're towards a partnership to work on the green lending, to see what we can do together, help them. So that's another information not there yet. One more thing I think maybe we can find is that CBRC Bank, China Bank Regulatory Commission, they are doing, because they said they have all the green lending policy in their banking practices, they can not only track how much amount of renminbi are put into the green lending, and so they internally, it's not without help, they're internally trying to find a way to define what is green lending, and then they themselves try to develop a system to track, so they can report back at the end of the year to say how much our loan are, how much percentage or dollar amount to the green lending. So just let you know, and if we have information, I will show you. The last point is the platform we have built with we call it Finance, Environment and Development Forum. It's WWF convening all the bankings that work with us to have this quarterly meeting. In the meeting, we talk about the issues the banks would like to know, including the most available standards, like IFC, the new standard. We ask them to be going through the consultation process, give inputs from their side. They present the good cases. Wukuang, I even don't know Wukuang's English name. Wukuang, a Chinese mining company, they had a good case. We want to present to the other banks, and then so we can learn. So that's a forum. It's basically we can put it together. We as a WWF every quarter. So if you're interested, we invite speakers, we invite participants. You can come. You can come. The next one should be in, I forgot, I think it's in March or April. It's regarding the mining, which have a strong Australian connections, because that's the issue. Last one was about Africa. So it's all like that. Those banks, why they come to us, because we brought them to Europe on study tour to learn what is best practice in the world. Then we brought them to Africa to learn what is the best practice on the ground and how people in Africa view them. And the third one is we come back and they have to make action plan in their own organization to see how they can move this. So receptiveness is really high. The participants of this Fed forum all are participants from their organization and some colleagues from their own organization or other financial institutions. So it's a good dialogue platform if you wanted to talk with Chinese banks. Thank you.
Is that what you were doing in South Africa just this last week?
Not this one.
Okay.
We were thinking even further on that.
Cool. That's a neat forum to know about. Did anyone else have a response to the question?
Well, I'm not sure that I have a response, Isabel. I just wanted to say that when we started to engage with the three agencies responsible for the green credit, we were very much pushed and supported by some of the U.S. equator banks, right? And what I wanted to do was to bring very specific implementation examples for the Chinese to see. And so in the delegation were U.S. banks, one from the UK. I also brought a Brazilian bank just so that the Chinese can see that there are different ways of doing environmental and social due diligence. But the U.S. the U.S. bank was very much behind the scenes, and I think that this kind of very concrete exchange speaks very persuasively to the Chinese. And I don't know whether there are similar platforms, the U.S.-Chinese dialogue, et cetera, that where you can think about the industry angle. But obviously, this is a very narrow example that I have in mind.
Can I raise a question to Isabel? I have never engaged with people from U.S. Export-Import Bank, so I'm so happy you are here. A quick question. You briefly mentioned that the goal of U.S. Exim is to protect your job opportunities, of U.S. job opportunities. In addition to that, what's the other goal of your bank?
Well, I think our primary goal, and especially now, is to support U.S. jobs. So it doesn't matter if it's technically, registered as a U.S. Company, if it's a venture here in the United States with employment here in the United States, whether it be, Mitsubishi or whether it be, French companies or Reba. We help all companies located based here in the U.S. and we have very strict content rules. I mean, in addition, we also have environmental policies, and Kirk and his group has worked with us different times, as has Motoko, different times trying to advise us in our other policies. But our main goal is to help maintain and expand production here in the United States. So.
Good. And then down the road there, and then Anna.
Thank you for your speech. My name is Luna Liu, and I'm a research assistant in Woodrow Wilson Center. I have a question that goes to Ms. Lin, or Ms. Li. Sorry, it's hard to. And also Ms. Tan. We all know, last year, Chinese government published a white book about China's economic and trade cooperation with Africa. So, and I remember Ms. Lin said you think there's no strategy in Chinese government in terms of Chinese companies' overseas activities. So I wonder how you think about this document and whether this document will be the potential drive for improving, the Chinese activities in Africa for the next step. Thanks.
And if you could pass it over to Anna. Anna, can you toss your question in real quick, and we'll do two at once? It's a self-serve method of question.
Hi, my name is Anna Patel. I'm from the Congressional Executive Commission on China. And my question relates to the green credit policy and its scope. Does it apply to all sizes of companies, and also its geographic scope? Does it also apply in areas out west? Are there differences in the way that it's applied in the western provinces? And is there a lot of communication between local actors and some of the larger national banks?
All right, we can knock those two questions back and gather more.
I guess I will mostly focusing on question one.
Yeah.
Okay. In China's mind, if you look at the white paper, it's called China Africa, and so that's in China's mind. Africa is one. That's also when I started my initiative 2-3 years ago. China is one to me. Now only 2 years later, I learned Africa is not one. Africa is a continent that bigger than the US, EU, and China combined. Africa is a continent with the 53, 56 countries, and even the number will grow. And each country has different countries' situation. I think China, for that trade, last week I was in South Africa talking with our colleagues in South Africa, in Africa continent, and they complained that when we talked to them as if they were one, they said, we are not one, we are each sovereign country. So I guess that China has to learn that when they deal with the world, with Africa, I think they have to learn Africa is not one. And that China-Africa trade white paper is just really, they did not desegregate different two countries. That will not give them enough information to make the right decision. If they collect them together, is not giving any meaningful. So I will see. I didn't read all the details of that report. I just get that impression out of it. I will do a more study to answer your next question about what is going to be a solution. I didn't know there was environment or anything, but just that perception is not going to really help them. So what are we trying to do? Also provide some information enough. With this, now I'm having the mic. I'll just say two more things. No, one is whenever you talk about China, you talk about engaging them. Remember, they are eager to learn. They are hungry for solutions. So if in your hand you have something can solve their problems, that they can gain, but the environmental problem they're facing as well, they are hungry for that. Over the 30 years we've been there, that's always the case. Second, language. China is so big, so they don't speak any other language. Most people don't speak any other languages. So if we try to reach them, we need to make our information available in Chinese so that they will be able to discuss, especially those workers on the ground in Africa, in Asia. They just, besides Chinese, they had no idea of how the other to do. So those are critical to get the message through. Sorry.
I think the green credit policy question has your name written all over it.
Thank you. So the policy applies to both state-owned banks and joint stock banks. And they have domestic application, obviously. I don't think that there is any distinction between West versus the rest of China. But the implementation is pushed by the center as well as encouraged to be pushed by the provincial authorities, right? So different provinces have announced different targets and different approaches to green credit. And the local authorities are working with the local CBRC branches to make sure that the banks in those provinces are adhering to the green credit policy. This is the general picture that I am aware of. Some of the specific provinces, decrees, et cetera, they're described in my article. I am not particularly aware that things are done differently in the West, although I can imagine that that's a very, very different picture from Beijing. And exactly how far the implementation has permeated in the West, it's very, very difficult to see. But again, I think that my view is that we need to go after the big lenders, the ones who are going to make really the large types of investments in other state-owned enterprises. And that's where you're going to capture most of the offending enterprises with energy consumption and resource consumption. And so that's been the strategy so far.
Okay, we got it.
I hope that's helpful.
We got a question here, and do I have another question out there together? Okay, Lindsay, you go for it. Then.
Okay. My name is Lindsay. I'm with the China Environment Forum, as well as with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And my question is about, you mentioned that the green credit and a lot of the green initiatives are driven primarily by the state and by apply only to the state, kind of state-owned enterprises or those sectors of China. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, are there any kind of green infrastructures that are being developed either at a local or a regional level or in the private sector? Maybe either are they independent from those more national initiatives, or are there any such, I guess, initiatives that are being explored in China right now? The green lending policy, the
the banks we talk about work with, they lend both to the state-owned enterprises and also any other enterprises, big or small. That's depending on their preferential direction to go. So everybody has, when they lend, they get a loan from banks. They should, if bank follows green lending policy, applies to all. If that's your question.
Thanks. I was wondering, especially when it comes to kind of, since we're talking about international investment, is that guided? I mean, are there any private sector actors that are kind of guided by green policies, and are they looking to use those green policies in investing abroad?
So you're talking strictly in the lending context, right? So the financial sector has several initiatives related to green investments, or you could call it maybe sustainable investments. So one is Equator, that deals with project finance, which is a specific type of lending. And then on the investment side, there's the principle for responsible investment, PRI. And these are sort of the recognized international platform for the financial sector. But on lending, Equator is very specific to project finance, which Chinese banks don't do very much. And so the question is, how could that be made applicable to either domestic lending or China's overseas lending using different kinds of financial products? So there's that dialogue ongoing. And then independently of it, I would say that, for example, China Banking Association has its own CSR platform. And as you can imagine, in China, business associations have close ties to government. But nonetheless, the Banking Association is actively engaged on the bank's role in CSR, for example.
In China, mostly the ones focusing with overseas business are the China Development Bank and Exim, Export-Import Bank of China. Then some other big banks like ICBC, I think their target is not really the overseas market, but mostly the global domestic market. However, for some of those companies really have to go out of the country to do construction contract, then sometimes they got loans from internal the banks, that commercial banks that focus in domestic market, because it's given to the company, not really. So in a way, it's complicated in the whole issue. And in the process, there are MOFCOM, there are NDRC. They have to approve certain things, and the Ministry of Finance. So it's a lot of players in there. I have 2 points to make on that. First of all, we don't know very much about how their overseas branches or projects are really fun. The full picture, we don't know that yet. We hope to understand more on the process. I forgot my second point. But let's keep it one.
Let's see, in the past few days, she's been in 3 different time zones. So we'll pardon you for that. But you all have just filled up this 2 hours. We're going to walk out smarter. First, applause for the speakers.